Hello, everyone. Today, I wanted to shift focus a little bit away from the previous topics on this channel. Bit of a more modern classic I wanted to cover. Recently, I read Dostoyevsky's Demons, a book that is considered one of his four great novels, but one that kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. I mean, when it comes to Dostoyevsky, Crime and Punishment, Brothers Karamazov, The Idiot, Notes from Underground are usually the four main books of discussion. And Demons is kind of seen as a bit of an outlier to a certain extent. One of his more unique novels, one of his more political novels, also one of his more funnier comedic novels. It is certainly a dark comedy, although it is very dark, especially towards the end. But in many ways, Demons is also quintessential Dostoevsky. And so, for that reason, and then also because it's a very good book, I would highly, highly recommend reading this. Now, for those of you who don't know this book or are unfamiliar with it, Demons is Dostoevsky's attempt at a political thriller. There are assassination plots, there's murder, there is political intrigue, there are many different political factions present, and throughout all of this, there is a political commentary running. Demons not only came out during a time where all of these leftist kind of socialist movements were starting to gain steam, both in Russia and in Europe as a whole, but it was actually based on a real life murder, a politically motivated murder. One that, if you're familiar with it, it almost kind of gives away what happens in the actual novel, so I won't discuss it here. But, if you grab a copy of this, usually any kind of introduction will go into that event a little bit. So if you do end up picking up this book, you can certainly read up more about that. The setting itself is a fictional small town in rural Russia. It has a very wide and robust cast of characters, and Demons is another example of Dostoevsky's absolute mastery of characterization. The book, there are over a dozen characters that get full characterizations, many of whom get full arcs, and they all are very unique and have very different kind of worldviews and goals. Again, that kind of harkens back to the theme and the topic of the novel. The actual plot, the intrigue of the political intrigue is very interesting. You shouldn't go into this expecting a Robert Ludlum Bourne Identity or like a Ian Fleming James Bond type of plot. It's very atypical within the genre of political thrillers or anything like that, but it is still very fun, for lack of a better term, to follow. A large chunk of the book is dedicated to following these political revolutionaries. But at the same time, the novel also does a really good job at keeping the reader aloof from what exactly they're plotting. And so because of that, it does a great job at ratcheting up that tension until the last 100 pages where things really start to go crazy, and as I mentioned earlier, start to really get dark. At the same time, though, the book is very funny. A lot of that comes from the fact that the political revolutionaries involved in this town can be very ridiculous, very eccentric at times, and the way they clash with each other and with the other townspeople leads to a lot of very comedic moments. A lot of the people in the town are also very kind of have their own kind of comedic stuff going on. Despite all these unique features, the book is still very essential Dostoevsky in that his recurring theme of existentialism, commentaries on nihilism and stuff like that are all still very present. ultimately, yes, there is commentary on all these left-wing movements and stuff like that, and kind of the reason why they're reacting against this kind of older Russian society. But at the core of everything, between all the revolutionaries, all the terrorists, you can even call them, as well as all of the kind of more established townspeople and local nobility, is this common sense of purpose or a lack of purpose, and the oftentimes feeble or misguided attempts to find it. Even though Peter, the son of Stepan, kind of sets himself up as the leader of the revolutionaries, ultimately there really is no plan to any of their activities. It's very all over the place, and at the end, after all of these acts of violence, the reader is left wondering what really was accomplished, even outside of the morality of everything, not to give too much away. So, again, it's a very unique book in Dostoyevsky's canon, but at the same time, it is also very quintessential to his themes, to all of the themes that he likes to explore. It's very comparable in a lot of ways to a book like Notes from Underground, where the protagonist in that book is kind of driven by the same impulses that many of the characters in this book are. So, would highly recommend it, especially if you want to get into Dostoyevsky, if you want to, certainly if you're a big fan of his and you're set out to, read all of his books and stuff like that, you're probably going to encounter and read this one anyways. But if you're more non-committal, you just want to read like the greatest hits, so to speak, I would certainly include this in that more specific category. The final thing I'll mention, it isn't a perfect book. The one real gripe I have about it is that Dostoyevsky very clearly has a bias when it comes to the political topics explored in the book. And so oftentimes the revolutionaries, the terrorists, are sometimes depicted as being so one-dimensional that a lot of the parts or scenes with like chapter meetings, for example, feel really out of place compared to the rest of the book, and also comedic in a way that differs from the more subtle comedic moments of the rest of the book. It almost kind of seems over the top in a way. But again, that is such a minor point bordering on a nitpick, but there are some pretty substantial moments in the book that these instances almost took me out of it a little bit. But otherwise, a fantastic book and definitely a recommendation on my part. That's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you for hearing me out. This is a very different type of video from what I've made in the past, like I said at the beginning, and so maybe a little rough around the edges, but it's definitely something I'm kind of experimenting with a little bit. I will still make some more traditional videos down the road, maybe mix it up a little bit, but yeah, I definitely am going to be more active on here and talk books more, so stick around for that.